Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Robin Brown, CIO for Protein North America at Cargill, and I am a proud member of the WLiT Board of Directors. I am so excited to have Sonya Roberts here with us today. She's the president of our salt business here at Cargill. She's been with Cargill for 13 years in various leadership roles and is a well-respected executive leader in the industry. Like so many, I am truly blessed to have her as a mentor at Cargill, and just as importantly, my friend. She's had an incredible 30-year journey through her career as she's faced different challenges, new opportunities, and balancing the importance of her family as she's moved across the country throughout her career. All of these things taught her about the importance of balance between work, family, the leader she wants to be, and the role model for so many that she's become. Sonya, I've had the distinct pleasure of hearing you speak at conferences, specifically around your career journey. I'd love for you to walk us through an overview of your career and why you picked the title for today's conversation.
Okay, thanks, Robin. First of all, I want to thank you for this invite, and MinTech, obviously, and WLiT for this opportunity, and the many sponsors, specifically Nutanix. So really, really generous. I was a little nervous about doing this because I heard you guys had, Corey Berry the last time. I'm like, I can't follow her, but but I'm here anyways, and I'm psyched about doing this. So I'm just going to give you a little overview of the journey, and it'll take me a little bit of time. Usually, I like to show a map. Because it's really important to talk about the different places, but we'll start with just kind of talking it through. And so born in Macomb, Mississippi as the youngest of 8 children, and my parents have been together, we're together over 65 years before my father passed away. So that means a lot to me about my parents and their longevity. I grew up though in Apple Valley High School and went to Apple Valley, Minnesota, and graduated from Apple Valley High School, but I couldn't wait to leave Minnesota. So I looked at a bunch of different schools, ended up at North Texas State University, which changed its name to University of North Texas while I was there. And I graduated with a finance degree. I went to work in the oil business. I knew nothing about oil, like nothing, and loved it. I joined Conoco in New Orleans. And I tell people when you're 22 and single and employed, New Orleans is a fabulous place to live. So I had a blast there. But I trained offshore on the rigs there in the Gulf of Mexico for the first 3 months, and then onshore, and then worked there in New Orleans for 3 years. We closed our office, moved down I-10 to the west to Lafayette. I lived there a little less than a year. I moved to Houston, and then I worked there for a while. Met my husband Phil at work, and he was in the IT department. We got married. I moved to Ponca City, Oklahoma, and we were there about 15 months. Big project moved me, which we'll talk about later. I moved back to Houston, which was our headquarters. I worked there for several years, and I had my daughter Lauren. And so this was in 2001, and while I was on maternity leave, I got transferred to Stavanger, Norway. So here, me and my 5-month-old daughter and my husband quit work at that time, and we moved to Norway, and we got bought at the same time by Philips. So we became ConocoPhillips. I moved to Norway briefly for less than a year, did the transition, merged the 2 businesses, and then transferred to Anchorage, Alaska. I worked there for a couple of years. We had my daughter Caitlin there. And then we moved back to Houston, and I worked for a couple of years, but decided that's ultimately where I didn't want to live long term. I wanted to live closer. I wanted to be back in Minnesota for a variety of reasons, but mainly my parents. I was offered a role at Cargill in the power and natural gas group. Hated it, truly. I don't even mind saying it. And there'll be a little bit of a conversation about why that's important to know. But I loved Cargill, the company. So that job wasn't good for me and the culture, but I loved the company. I transitioned to the salt business a year after that, and I led the commercial team, which was one of my favorite jobs ever. I did that for 5 years, became the president of the Cargill eggs business and the Canadian chicken business. We restructured protein in North America, and then I started leading growth ventures, which was kind of like business development, venture investment, strategy, and then strategic pricing. I did that job for about 3 years. Really liked that too. And then I got an opportunity to come back and lead the entire salt business in June of last year. So that's 30 plus years in corporate America across the multiple companies and industries and geographies, levels. I've seen a lot. Now I get to work for Cargill. So here's a little quick Cargill commercial, right? Where we exist to nourish the world in a safe, responsible, and sustainable way. We have about 155,000 employees across 70 countries, and it's a 155-year-old company. So when I heard Nutanix talk about 11 years, was like, what a difference of where we are in our maturity. It's cool to I'd love to have some time spent learning a lot about their company because we're just in different places. Cargill's 110 billion or more in annual revenue a year, and we really specialize in ag, food, animal nutrition, and financial services. So that's who we are. Today I sit with my husband, Phil, who we've been married for now 25 years. We have 2 daughters, Lauren, who's age 19, a sophomore at the University of Minnesota, and Caitlin, who's 16 and a junior in high school. So that's where I am. It's been quite a journey and quite a ride. Now you can see why I use a map usually when I'm explaining it. I picked the theme today because I think back to when I transitioned to Cargill in 2008, and I'd had 19 years of working for Conoco or ConocoPhillips and a pretty successful career. Decided to move and come back to Minnesota. There was nothing really pushing me from from ConocoPhillips at all. And I had known somebody who worked at Cargill, so I ended up getting in that way. They didn't have a job for me, so we kind of just sort of created something, knowing that we'd find something along the way. I met all these amazing people during my interview process, but I never met my boss. Imagine that. Like the whole time, I didn't meet him until the first day I walked in, because I've always had this belief, this 18-month rule. I can live anywhere for 18 months. I can work for anybody for 18 months. I can do any job for 18 months. And that's always been my rule. So I figured, no big deal. Well, it was terrible. And so it didn't last long. But I do remember having a conversation with my mentor. And my mentor, Vicky, super just like the calmest person you'll ever meet. And she says to me, here's the deal. I want you to rethink this whole thing. You need to reframe this. I said, I've made a mistake. I shouldn't have done this. And she's like, no. Here we go. You know you're going to work hard again. What I want you to do right now is I want you to focus on your family. I want you to refocus your energy, your family. You need to acclimate them to Minnesota. Then I want you to rethink your timelines. You think about everything in 18 months or less. I want you to think about next week. So I want you to recalibrate your calendar. And then she said the other thing, which is she said, you have to redefine your victory, Sonya. You have been thinking about winning only in one perspective because it's been this successful career. Now, how do you truncate them, make them smaller, or make them that? How do I actually decide that maybe that's not the victory, this one is? And so I'll even give you an example. I had this job that nobody cared about it, right? And I'm trying to get people to really be interested in this customer information. And there are a bunch of traders. So they think about counterparties, not customers. So I'm trying to get this customer language and this culture sort of built in. And I would put together these charts and graphs every single week to talk about them. And nobody read these doggone things. And so I was super frustrated. And one day, this guy, Dave, who really did not want me there, and he was one of the senior leaders, and I was going into the actual document, and I remember, you know how you pull it up, and it says, so-and-so is in the document, so do you want to pull up a copy? And it said, Dave is in your document. Do you want to pull up a copy? I'm here to tell you, there was a celebration on that trading floor.
There is the little win right there, Sonya.
Yeah, and so that's how you redefine your victories. And we ended up getting there with Dave, but if I had only celebrated, which was Dave understood it, he got where I was, and not the incremental steps, I would have been miserable. And so right now, we have an opportunity to redefine our victories. And that's why I want to talk about that.
Sonya, I like how you turned a completely suboptimal experience into a victory. It was just a great way to reshape that thought. I'd love for you to talk about a little bit more about the impactful events in your career journey that led you to the leader that you are today.
Well, I mean, I think one of the first things that happened to me really early is I had this leader, Mark, who was phenomenal right out of college. Mark was phenomenal. And he came back to me and he said, Sonya, I want you to understand the difference as a leader between fairness versus equality. And I was like, aren't they the same, right? I mean, I was junior, I was 22 years old, and here he was talking to me, and he wasn't my boss, he was my boss's boss. And I said, what does that mean? And he says, for example, you're going to find out here shortly. I just terminated Adam. So why'd you terminate Adam? And he's like, Adam came back from lunch really late and missed this meeting. That's how it's going to look to everybody else. He was with Randy. I'm not going to terminate Randy. So people are going to say, I played favoritism. What they don't know is that Adam had already been in trouble. We'd already talked to Adam about performance. So Adam, this was what was fair. It's not what's equal. And the best leaders in the world, Sonya, know how to operate and differentiate and lead on fairness, not equality. And for me, that has fundamentally changed, I think, where how I think about leading. And it's been one of the things that I think about, and people say when they like working for me, it's, I am very fair. I make it, if you need this, we're going to take care of that for you. But that may not be the same thing somebody else is. And that means you can have a really hard conversation with people because you have to, because fairness is not about policies. It's about what's right for each individual. So that was one of the things. The other was that I understood my values really quickly. When I lived in Ponca City on a Monday, so I've been there about 15 months, on a Monday, we announced that we were IPOing from DuPont. And on Friday, I had moved back to Houston. So in 5 days, I left my husband. We didn't have any kids. And I went back to be the assistant to the CFO. And at the time, it was the largest US IPO. That didn't last long. UPS had an IPO later that was bigger. It was a big deal. We had bankers and roadshows and red herrings, and the list went on. And I worked as the executive assistant to the CFO of Conoco at the time. And it was crazy. It's the hardest I've ever worked in my life, Robin, and the hardest I ever planned to work in my life. Okay. And yeah, it was nuts. And I tell people that at that time, I ended up going into him one morning and saying, Bob, we need to talk. And I remember him looking at me over his glasses, you know, one of those long offices with the dark walls. And that felt like a really long office at that moment. He's like, this sounds serious. I was like, yeah. Well, sit down. I don't want to sit down. I need a couple things. I need to be able to work out in the morning. Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'm not coming in at 6:30, which is when he required me to come in Monday, Wednesday, Fridays for a meeting. I'm not coming in until later. And he's like, okay, but you have to carry your phone. Well, keep in mind, this is not what phones looked like in 1998. Okay? 1998, phones were much bigger. And so I was like, fine, I'll put it somewhere when I go to work out. The second thing I need to do is that my husband can take the company plane, and it's deemed business travel. So he can go back and forth. And the third thing I need to do is I need to be able to go to church on Sunday morning. And for me, I didn't understand it at the time, but I actually was living my values. It was about health and wellness. It was about relationships. It was about mind, body, and soul connection. And at the time, I just knew I needed these things, and I was ready to walk away from that job if I couldn't get these. That's how important they were. What's important as a leader is that you know what your values are, because I will tell you, they show up, and they show up in you as a leader. And so I just tell people, spend some time really understanding what those are, and then how they show up in your leadership. And the last thing I will tell you is pick your partner well. So when I talk to a lot of young folks who are thinking about, who they're getting married to, yeah, I tell you, pick your partner well. Because let me tell you, my husband, I couldn't have done all I've done if I would have had a partner that wasn't supportive. And I tell people that when you close the doors to your house, it doesn't matter where it is. If it's good, it'll be good anywhere. If it's bad, you can live on the best street in the most beautiful house and it'll be bad anywhere. So pick your partner very well. So that's what I remember.
Yeah. Sonya, I love that analogy of living on the best street in any town. And I hadn't thought of that type of a perspective before you shared it with me for that very first time. When I think about looking back in our careers, we've all had some amazing leaders, and we've had some not so amazing leaders in our careers. Let's talk a little bit about how that shapes us in who we are and who we want to be, Sonya.
Yeah. I told you guys about Mark, who came to me and explained to me about fairness versus equality. He was one of the best leaders I've ever worked for. I also worked for a woman, Natalie, who are just people who make you feel important, right? Like you know you're valued when you're talking to them. And they taught me a lot about empathy and how to hold people accountable in a really respectful fashion. I called them, they were almost like my leadership whisperers. I think of them even still today when I do something and I'll be like, I should have done that differently. Ah, crap, I ruined that. Or Natalie would be proud of me, or Mark would be proud of me. So those are people that I think are just outstanding leaders. I also worked for a guy, Tom, who was one of my favorite bosses as well. He was results driven, and he was frankly one of the best businessmen I've ever met. He had a huge heart, but somewhere in his journey, Robin, he had been told that he couldn't really show that. And so people warned me against working for him.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, he's still one of my favorite people today, who I go talk to and see and still get advice from. When I'm in Houston, I visit him probably more than anyone else.
Wow.
And he taught me so much about running a business, but he led differently than me. And I think you have to learn from both. And so I tell people that you need both in your life. You can't have just great leaders. You need to also have the leaders that you're going, I don't know, or they lead so differently than me. You need both of them.
Yeah.
And I tell you that I am a big believer in mentors, coaches, and sponsors. People talk about mentors all the time, and mentors talk with you, right? And you need those in your life. I actually think you need coaches because coaches talk to you. They're very situational. I use coaches all the time. If I'm going into a meeting where it's going to be difficult and I know somebody else is coming in to be a part of it, I'll be like, hey, I need some feedback after this is over. Will you give me some ideas? I remember I had a lawyer once, I was going into a tough meeting, and he's like, I'm going to actually move my glasses. He had the glasses going up and down if things aren't going well. But that's situational coaching.
It
And then
is.
sponsors talk about you. And that is what you need more than anything. Who's wearing your t-shirt in the room? Out of all the jobs I've had in my professional life, I've only really applied for the one I had out of school. When I came to Cargill, I submitted paperwork, and the job when I led the first time in salt. Everything else in my entire life, someone has put me in. Those are sponsors. And you need all three.
Awesome, Sonya. I think that's what we can often refer to as our own board of directors. We need all different types of mentors, coaches, just great leaders. And I think we also learn just as much from the not so good leaders as well, because then we learn who we don't want to be when we are leading people as well.
That's right.
Well, let's pivot for a little bit here, Sonya. So we live in Minneapolis, where the death of George Floyd started a significant change movement across the globe. I've found this to be a time of listening, learning, and truly being curious. It's also a time to be aware of everything around us and the circumstances that impact each and every one of us. Sonya and I were recently on a walk together, and she shared an interesting perspective on understanding and being aware of what privilege means in a way that most of us probably wouldn't have even thought. Sonya, would you mind sharing a couple of those perspectives with us?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Robin, right, I was, as many people were, right, saddened, obviously, by the murder of George Floyd. I don't think I expected, frankly, that level of sadness that I felt. I wrote letters. When I transitioned kind of from emotional, which is where I was immediately following, I mean, I would cry a lot, into kind of intellectual, I write. And so I like to write. And so I wrote some letters, or I wrote a letter to my organization. I wrote a letter to the chief of police. I wrote a letter to all kinds of people. I just started to write. And I'm not going to go through any of those, but I think what I will tell you is that you think about what was the win or how to redefine that. And the thing that's been most impactful for me is the conversations that I've had have been invaluable, really. They have been amazing. I tell people that some of my friends have, and my white friends, I should say, have impressed me beyond measure with some of their approaches and stances. Like I don't think I could have even haven't imagined the approach they took and some of the things that they've done, and I've just been so humbled by it. I had a friend who sent me a note right after she was reading a book, and she wanted to talk about white privilege, and she actually kind of apologized for it. And I'm like, why are you apologizing for it? You don't need to apologize for it. You just need to own it. Right? Like, you have it. Okay. I don't need you to be sorry for it. I just need you to, now that you own it, how are you curious about it? Right? Like, how do you then become curious, learn more, and then be courageous? Right? Like, be courageous when it's creating an advantage for you. How do I adjust it so that it can help people who are not being advantaged? That's what I need. You don't have to be embarrassed by it at all. And so I use, when I think about, I used to run when I was in my early 40s, and I was leaving right before leaving Houston. It's hot in Houston, right? Like, it's ridiculously hot. So to get in, and I ran marathons. So to get in really long runs in the morning, I have to get up before dark. Well, when I get up before dark as a woman, right, like it's a spreadsheet exercise. Who's meeting me at this mile marker?
Yeah,
Who's
it's
meeting
not
me
safe.
here? I mean, it's work, right? Like, you're planning. When a guy wants to get up and run before dark, he puts his shoes on.
Yeah.
That's privilege. Right? That's what privilege is. And so there's a ton of privilege. I tell people I have Christian privilege. My marquee holidays are celebrated in this country. Yesterday was Yom Kippur. I mean, it's the most holiest of holidays for all people who observe Judaism. And wasn't like it was celebrated at work. So I have privilege because my Christian holidays are celebrated. I have, to some degree, of economic privilege. I was telling you about, I'd gone downtown recently to go get hair. Like, I get hair for braiding my daughter's hair. Let's not go into that, but I get hair for braiding her hair, and the extensions. And I go to my normal place, and I'm going down there. I drive down, and it's boarded up, and it says not reopening. I'm like, what? So I called. I don't call. I actually drive to 2 other locations, but they've been impacted by the rioting post the George Floyd. So they're all closed. And I am legitimately annoyed, right? I'm annoyed by it. And then I realize, as I look in one of the parking lots, there's a grocery store. All the windows have been broken out of it, and people are doing their grocery shopping. And Sonya gets to drive back to her neighborhood and go to the grocery store that's practically got carpeting on the floor, right? And I can order on Amazon. And so I tell people, we all have different privileges. You need to own them when you have them, right? Be self-aware about it. Be courageous to call it out, and then make deliberate changes when you can to ultimately impact those who are disadvantaged. We all have them, but what do we need to do? And we need to own them.
I love that, Sonya. It's great perspective, and you put things in a very different angle that maybe we wouldn't have thought about. I mean, running marathons, I do that too. I've ran marathons, triathlons. These are the things you don't think of until you're in the moment and you look around and go, maybe this isn't the safest time, or boy, this is a lot of work to plan. So I love that. How does that make you show up a little more differently as a leader then, Sonya?
I think right now, more than anything, we need curious and courageous leaders.
Yeah.
My coach, so I've had this coach, Mary O'Connor, for years, and she was a friend of mine, and then she became a coach. She told me once, she said, Sonya, the best leaders in the world get curious in times of complexity.
Yeah.
And she said, when things get hard, you lean in and learn. And so I think right now the best leaders are getting curious, and the best leaders are getting courageous. So I've been learning more. I've been learning more about my own history. I've been learning more as we go through COVID about, health. Heck, we're practically all epidemiologists right now, right? I've been learning about social injustice. I've been learning about myself. And we need an organization. We need leaders right now to step up And really, ultimately, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you do have to be courageous. You have to recognize that you aren't going to be perfect. So you have to be humble and be vulnerable.
Yep. I love that, Sonya. I want to come back to a statement that you made. It's the best leaders get curious in times of complexity. When things get hard, lean in and learn. That's a phrase I'm going to encourage everybody on this call to remember from today's conversation, because I truly believe that that's applicable in life, in your work setting, and in most circumstances in life. Right. There's a lot of change going on around us during these uncertain times, and COVID changed everything that was considered normal before March. Many people lost their jobs, their businesses, their dreams due to the riots that are happening across the country. These events changed the way we approach work, our family, our lives. Sonya, what's it been like being an executive leader during these uncertain times? And are you seeing the corporate dynamics change over the last 7 months?
Yeah, I mean, you outlined it really well, right? What we're enduring right now. I think back to my advice from my mentor about, redefining a victory right now. I'm not Pollyanna. I know it's tough. And frankly, I don't think we're done. I think it's going to get messier. So, we're in a marathon, and maybe even an ultra marathon a little bit. I read an article recently from a company called Tignum, and they do a lot of performance and leadership performance kind of work. And they sent out articles pretty recently, and they did one that I actually sent a note back to them, and I said, this I needed right now. And they had, at the beginning of COVID, leaders, right? We moved into the reptilian brain. We had this surge of energy. We rallied. We upped our game. We were committing to figure it out. We got back to the basics. We affirmed our values. Our travel was canceled, right? I used to travel every week. No jet lag, no business travel stress. I wasn't commuting. I'm working from home. I didn't care about my looks anymore, right? I got COVID curls going on. But at the same time, at some point, we all kind of moved into a little bit of emotional fatigue. We did. Whether it's worried about the things you just talked about. In addition to that, we had climate change, right? Hurricanes showed up and fires. And I think you can't underestimate that we all are in that space. Mm-hmm. And then people have, kids going to school, and so anyway, I tell people you're not alone. I think the advice coming from Vicki, my mentor at the time, about refocus your energy, right? What are the acts of service that you can do right now, thinking of others? What can I do to invest in and be better for myself? How do I organize my house? How do I spend time with my employees in one-on-one conversations, different than I would have had before? I recalibrated my calendar. So yeah, I'm looking far out, but I also look at next week differently. I didn't focus as much on it. Now I'm really planning ahead emotionally what's coming. And I have redefined my victories. I celebrate the business results very differently. And you should too, right? If you're in a travel industry right now and you're comparing yourself to last year, you're going to be disappointed. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Right? Absolutely. So compare yourself to the recovery that's going on, and compare yourself to competitors, but don't compare yourself to last year. Conversely, if you're at Home Depot or Lowe's or Microsoft, and you're comparing yourself to last year, you're selling yourself short, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Those are the things, like, look at it differently. Focus on outcomes and results and behaviors that you have versus time and seats and, whether or not somebody's working from this hour to this hour. You've got to be focused on outcomes, and you can't spend time on some of those minutiae details. And then have more conversations with your team members one-on-one. I've gotten to know people on my team so much better. I know their families. Like, there's kids walking in and dogs are barking, right? And I've sent cards to people's houses. I've sent fruit baskets when I felt like somebody's really doing a lot. I actually have walking meetings. You and I have had one where we meet somewhere, or you come over to my house and we walk to a lake, and I've had many of those. I've had some in-person lunches. I'm finding ways to connect, and that's, for me, redefining victories.
Yeah.
And then personally, my time with my family has been even better. So
I think what's going to be interesting on that, Sonya, is how do we not go back to the way we were, not losing that one-on-one time with our team members, really taking this time to understand, you know, what does go on in their family. And we've learned about pets and their grilling. You know, we've learned so much about our team members. How do we not go back, right? How do we keep this going? I think is what's going to be very interesting when we get close to being done with this ultra marathon.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. It's going to take deliberate actions you have to be really conscientious about it. Yep, I agree.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing your journey with us and offering some really great perspective, Sonya. We're going to open it up for the Q&A session using Pigeonhole, and then we're going to come back to Sonya to provide some closing comments and thoughts at the end of our session. So if we can move forward, I think we've got Pigeonhole. Do we have a slide up, you guys, that we can forward to? All right, perfect. So for those of you that have already put questions out there, thank you very much. If you haven't, you can go in and put in a new question at this link, or you can go in and vote for a question that's already there. So we'll give you just a moment to do that. And then what I'll do is I'll go in and take the couple of top questions with the most votes.
Did we get any questions?
We're getting some questions. I see a lot of people coming in right now, so this is good. All right. Ooh, they're jumping around on us, Sonya.
Okay.
Let's give it just a little bit more time. I see a lot.
Okay. That works.
No, and Sonya, just to kind of carry on, I love your perspective on, you know, you've prioritized your family, you've prioritized conversations with friends that you haven't seen in a while. It's a lot of reshaping and reflecting during these times that I absolutely love. And I hope we all continue on this as our own lessons learned. And it took us a pandemic to sometimes get to this perspective. But now what do we do with it going forward is up to us.
Yeah, I love that. So most of my direct reports live in Minneapolis, and we all work in the same office, but I have one who lives in Ohio. And it was interesting because she said to me, probably a month in after all of us went home, and she said, I've never been more connected to the team.
Yeah.
And it was because we're all in the same boat now.
Yeah.
Right? Before it would be all of us in a room and she would be on the phone and she would never, you know, feel. And so I'm like, we got to do better.
We do.
Because she should feel like that all the time. And so it's that kind of stuff that I hope we maintain.
Okay, I think we've got a couple here, Sonya. So top question right now is, with the heightened awareness on diversity and inclusion and equity, how do you believe this awareness is impacting equity for women in tech?
Oh, in tech. You may have to help me on that last part right there. I think in general, I mean, so that focus on equity across is about, right? So we need to have an inclusive environment where people can, it's not just about the numbers, we need to have representation. So that's part of it, right? When you have representation, I can tell you it brings more representation. There's an old adage that 70% of senior positions are filled via network. Yeah. Okay. And so if your network, and networks by nature, are narcissistic, there are people who are most like you. Yeah. And so if your network isn't deliberately broad, right, it's going to be really hard for us to change and get to parity or get to any kind of real change in representation. Once we do representation, I also think then there's the environment has to be incredibly inviting and inclusive to allow people to not just be invited to the party, but actually dance once they get there, right? And so both of those things have to be in play. I don't know the tech as well as to how that is and how it's changing. I have I don't know it personally, let me put it like that. I've read articles on things that are going on in Silicon Valley, stuff like that, but I don't know it personally. But we have work, a lot of work to do in this space, both for people of color and women, frankly.
Yeah, I agree. The next question we have, Sonya, are you seeing women within our industry taking a disproportionate professional hit? If so, how and why?
Well, it's funny that you say that. There is a study out there right now that has proven already that is exactly what's happening. So we are going to take a step back because of what's going on with women predominantly sharing and taking on the brunt of what's going on for children at home. And so they're taking steps back, and you have seen, and we have seen, women actually making some decisions as it relates to, I can't do this, and I need to make sure that I take care of my family. We are consciously at Cargill. I mean, I can tell you at this company, we are doing everything in our power to remove the barriers so that we can keep women in their roles. Do I think we're doing it perfectly? The answer is no. Do I think we can do more? The answer is yes, we're going to continue to do more. But we have already seen that, and there's already studies out there that are showing that. So we have to be deliberate, and we have to be able to remove barriers. So that's like, if people need to work at different hours, they need to work at different hours. They need to manage, help them manage their schedule. I don't know what it is. I've seen some companies do some really creative things, but we have seen a step back, and I do believe this will have an impact longer term. I wish I could say that that wasn't going to be the case, but I do believe there will be.
But I think this also goes back to one of your earlier statements, Sonya, about having the understanding of what your values and what your priorities are, and having that conversation with your direct leader. So now you can move timing of work around to help your kids with their e-learning or whatever your situation is. So I think that's a good association there, Sonya.
The other thing I would tell you too, Robin, is that sometimes as women leaders, we are afraid to ask.
We are.
Don't be afraid to ask for whatever help you need right now. I know that's hard, right? Because there's a lot of, like, there's no way I would let them know what's going on. Trust me, now's the time. And so don't be afraid to ask, because, I can't help if I don't have a clue as to what's going on. And I know most people do want to help. So don't be afraid to ask.
Absolutely. Great point, Sonya. Next question. Have you ever felt challenges working mostly in white workspaces? If so, how did you combat those challenges?
So most of my career has been, right? I mean, I worked in the oil business 25 years ago. So most of my career has been, I've been the minority, right? I don't know any way of not having to work through it, right? So there's times that I was telling you when I told you earlier, I've been learning about myself. There's some elements of things that I didn't know were hard for me. Actually, until now, I've kind of been peeling back a little of these layers going, actually, nobody else has to think about that. I wonder why. And it's been a good learning for me as I've gone through some of this. So I'll give you an example. I was listening to a female comedian, and she's white, and she was talking about why she was supporting Black Lives Matter. And she's funny, right? She's a comedian. She's putting it all together. Okay. And she said, one of the things she said is, I've never been asked to leave a store or been questioned about shoplifting. And I remember being like, what? Never in your life have you? Because I actually didn't know that nobody, like people, not everybody had, right? So for me, that was as normal as I can be. I can think back to just coming out of college and having to go to some pretty, kind of high level events and being in these formal dresses. And this is before formals were sold at TJ Maxx, right? They were only sold in like certain rooms of the round room or the oval room at Macy's and places like that. And how uncomfortable and how much I hated it. And I thought that was a normal experience for people. So my point is that I'm learning along the way myself. But yes, I have had to. I do have conversations with people if I feel like that they either don't want me there because I'm a woman or because I'm Black or whatever it is. And I try to just get to, we have work to do, right? So I try to peel back this isn't a personal thing at all, we have to do. That's really my objective, to get there. But I don't always get there. And ultimately, I'm not going to apologize for being a woman or for being Black. So they've got to work through it and get over it. But I have had some pretty direct conversations with people about them being uncomfortable around me. And like I said, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But we have work to do. And so I'm constantly focused on that.
And thanks for sharing those experiences. I know those aren't always comfortable to share, Sonya, but for other folks, we can learn from those experiences and understand what that had to have been like. Thank you.
Yep.
The next question we have, how did you know when it was the right time to leave your job for another opportunity?
Yeah, great question. So when I think about leaving ConocoPhillips and moving to Cargill, a lot of it had to do with a personal decision of me with my parents. They were getting older, couldn't travel. I needed to be near them. The fact that I wanted my kids to be in Minnesota and grow up in Minnesota, and I didn't want to stay in Houston. So there was a series of things that were going on. I don't know if you ever know it's the right time. What I would tell you is that it was scary, right? Like 19 years of working for a company, they all knew me. I was, I had a brand that was well respected, and you never know what you're going to. This is what I want you to think, every one of you, is that you're capable of working anywhere. And so what you have, you can take with you. All the learnings you have, everything that is who you are, you get to take it with you, and it will transfer to another company. Companies aren't that different. And if that one doesn't work out, you'll find another one.
Yeah.
You're employable. And so don't get caught in the fear that that you should stay trapped. If you feel trapped, don't. You deserve more. And so you're employable somewhere else. I can guarantee you are.
And I think I would go back to, again, what you said earlier, know your values. Yeah. When the company you're working for no longer aligns with your values, that's probably another sign it's time to change.
That's right? Exactly.
All right, next question. What's the most challenging part of being a leader right now?
The most challenging part for me, I am very much an extrovert and a people person. And I go in and out of a little bit of emotional fatigue right now because I don't get the energy from everyone else. And so being in my office is hard. So that's hard for me. But I know that, I don't get the privilege of being in an emotional fatigue state for very long. So suck it up and figure it out, because you have a team that deserves better. And so that's probably the hardest. I think that feeling of connection for me right now is really hard. So leaders are having to do different things, right? Rally around stuff, videos. How do I get out? We have open forum today, right? Like, how do we talk to people? Because normally that would be happening more organically, and it's not. And so for me, that's one of them. The other is that, we do have a lot of stuff going on, right? And Robin, you walked through a bunch of it that's going on, and getting people. And right now there's been a little bit of, somebody said this to me the other day, there's been an acceptance of meanness in our country right now. And so she said to me, she's like, so I need to get people to understand that it's not okay to be mean at work. And she was talking to me about her organization and what she was going through, and a specific situation that she was going through. And I think that that's that kind of like, let's pull ourselves up and really figure out how to be and how to redefine what we're going through and really see a victory. And so being that, balancing that really I'm super happy and wonderful. At the same time, you have to be incredibly empathetic and understand that this is tough. And so that balance right now in messaging and response and behaviors is really hard.
No,
But important.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we've got a lot of great questions that are still out there on Pigeonhole for Sonya, but we've only got a few minutes left, folks. So Sonya, you shared some great perspectives on how our own awareness can impact our thoughts, behaviors, and decisions. What closing thoughts would you like to leave us with as we reframe our minds and redefine what a victory could be, Sonya?
I think there's two things, or three things I would say. One is that, as I mentioned earlier, curious and courageous leadership is needed now more than ever. So lean in, get curious, and get courageous. The other thing I would tell you is it's okay for you guys as leaders to move through that state of emotional fatigue. You're not alone. I tell people I feel 9 times out of 10 that maybe not that many. Okay, maybe 7 times out of 10. I feel like I'm steel, right? Like I am incredibly strong. And then some days it's like just kind of hard plastic. And I told my girlfriends that we were having dinner, and I had a health scare with my youngest daughter. I'd already had one with my oldest daughter, and we resolved it, and I was kind of through that. But my youngest daughter had a health scare, and we were taking her to Children's. And I was like, you know what? And if this happens and this is bad, like I think I might be on that edge. And for me to admit that I actually might be glass, that there's a little bit of break-in that could happen, was hard. And so I think you just need to understand it's okay to have those states of emotional fatigue. But the other part that I'm going to say now is you can't dwell there for long. As leaders, you have the responsibility for livelihoods of people, a lot of people, and they deserve a leader who can fight through that. And if you can't, you need to find something else because you have a team of people who deserve that. Yeah. So we have to reframe the situation and find a way to provide victories for our team.
Sonya, I love your message from today. I think this really gives us a whole different perspective on how we can redefine what a victory might look like on the other side of any situation. So Sonya, thank you for being here with us today and sharing your journey with us. Your perspectives, your great insights to your lessons learned have given us a lot to reflect on in our own lives and how we can truly redefine what a victory could look like. I sincerely appreciate your creative mind, your exceptional leadership, and always your friendship. Thank you, Sonya.
Thank you, Robin. Really appreciate it.
You bet. Now I'd like to turn it over to Jade Denson from Mintech to close out our program for the day.
Awesome. Thanks, Robin. So, hi, my name is Jade Denson. I'm the Director of Member and Community Engagement with the Minnesota Technology Association. WLiT is a community that's part of our association, and we're so proud to support the efforts of our WLiT board as they curate awesome events like these to connect, educate, and reach back to women in tech. And today is such a great example of why spaces like these are so important for women in technology. So, we all had the privilege of listening to Sonya Roberts' insights today, and I think it's pretty safe to speak for the entire audience and say, let's give a virtual round of applause to our sponsors. We couldn't have done and had such amazing discussion like this without our sponsors. Your investment fuels our tech ecosystem and truly helps build an even stronger community for women in tech. So it's almost time to conclude our September WLiT event, but before I let you go, I want to make sure you all save the date for our upcoming event happening on October 20th. Although WLiT was forced to pivot to virtual because of the current pandemic, our amazing WLiT board has managed to still deliver really rich and enjoyable content for our community. In June, we had Corey Berry, and today we heard from the amazing Sonya Roberts. With that being said, I wouldn't want to be the one to miss the next upcoming event. So virtually save that date for October 20th and have a great rest of your evening, folks. And on behalf of the Minnesota Technology Association and the WLiT board, thanks for coming. Have a good rest of your night.